The royal square was busy that afternoon with visitors from many places. People stood close together near the tall gates and waited quietly. Cameras were raised and soft voices filled the air. The royal guard stood near the fence in a bright red uniform. His posture was straight and his eyes faced forward. He looked calm and still like a statue. Many tourists admired the guard and spoke about his discipline. Some tried to wave their hands to make him move. Others whispered jokes to their friends. The guard did not react to any sound or movement. His stillness made the place feel serious and important. A man named Mark stood near the front of the crowd. He was wearing a casual shirt and sunglasses. At his side was his bulldog named Bruno. The dog was strong and alert and pulled slightly on the leash. Mark looked bored and checked his phone again and again. Mark spoke loudly to people near him. He said the guard was just pretending to be strict. He laughed and said anyone could stand still like that. Some people looked uncomfortable with his tone. Others ignored him and focused on the guard. Bruno sensed the noise and tension around him. The dog lifted his head and watched the guard closely. His ears were alert and his body was firm. Mark noticed this and smiled as if he enjoyed the attention. He tightened the leash for a moment and then relaxed his hand. A woman standing nearby pulled her child closer. She felt uneasy and stepped back slightly. An older man frowned and shook his head. The mood in the crowd slowly changed from excitement to concern. The guard remained still and silent. Mark stepped forward and crossed the marked line near the gate. A small sign warned visitors to keep distance. Mark ignored it and moved closer to the guard. He raised his phone and began recording a video. He spoke to the camera with a grin on his face. He waved his hand close to the guard's face. The guard did not blink or turn his head. Mark laughed louder and turned to the crowd. He said the guard would never move no matter what happened. Some people whispered for him to stop. Bruno growled softly and leaned forward. Mark felt the pull and looked down at the dog. Instead of stepping back, he spoke in a teasing voice. He acted as if the situation was a game. The people around him grew tense and silent. The air felt heavy and still. The sounds of the city faded into the background. Everyone focused on the man, the dog, and the guard. Phones were raised higher and hands trembled slightly. The guard remained calm and focused. Mark adjusted his grip on the leash. His fingers loosened without much thought. Bruno stepped forward and tested the space ahead. The crowd gasped as they realized what was happening. A few people shouted for Mark to stop. The guard remained still and alert. His eyes faced forward and his body stayed firm. Years of training held him steady. He did not show fear or anger. He waited with quiet confidence. Mark laughed again and looked around proudly. He enjoyed being the center of attention. He did not notice the fear in the faces around him. He did not listen to the warnings. The leash slipped further from his hand. Bruno felt the freedom and moved forward another step. His muscles tightened and his focus sharpened. The crowd took a collective breath. A woman covered her mouth in shock. A man reached out as if to grab the leash but was too far away. The moment stretched and felt unreal. The guard still did not move. The leash finally fell from Mark's hand. Time seemed to slow for everyone watching. Bruno moved forward quickly toward the guard. Gasps echoed across the square. Mark's smile faded as he realized what he had done. He reached out but it was too late. The crowd stepped back in fear. Some people turned away while others could not look away. The guard reacted in a controlled and precise way. His training guided every movement. He stayed calm and focused on safety. His actions were fast but measured. Bruno stopped suddenly as the guard took command of the situation. The dog hesitated and slowed. The crowd watched in complete silence. Every eye was fixed on the scene. Mark froze and felt a rush of regret. His heart pounded and his hands shook. He realized his actions were careless. The attention he wanted now felt heavy and wrong. The guard maintained control and order. His presence alone shifted the energy in the square. The crowd began to breathe again. The danger passed as quickly as it came. Officials moved toward the scene to assist. People whispered and shared shocked looks. Phones continued recording but with quieter hands. The guard returned to his position with calm strength. Mark stood still and speechless. He could not believe how close the situation came to disaster. Bruno stood quietly by his side again. The square slowly returned to its normal rhythm. No one spoke loudly anymore. The crowd understood the seriousness of the moment. Respect replaced laughter and silence replaced noise. The royal guard stood tall once more. What followed next would leave everyone in the square thinking deeply. The consequences of one careless choice were just beginning to unfold. The square stayed quiet after the sudden rush of fear. People who were recording lowered their phones a little. A few parents held their children close. Mark stood frozen near the line, and his face looked pale. Bruno stood near him, breathing hard, and his body was tense. The royal guard did not shout or show anger. He took a small step in a way that looked simple to the crowd. His hands stayed controlled, and his shoulders stayed square. Bruno stopped moving forward, as if the guard's calm energy changed the air. The dog's eyes stayed locked for a moment, and then he looked away. A second guard appeared from the side of the gate. He moved with quiet speed and stood at an angle that protected the space. The crowd watched him closely, expecting drama. Instead, everything felt calm and firm. It was like a storm that refused to grow. An officer named Ben walked in from the edge of the square. He wore a dark uniform and carried a small radio. He did not run, but he moved fast enough to show the situation mattered. He looked at Mark first, then at Bruno, then at the guards. His expression stayed serious and professional. Ben spoke in a low voice to Mark. He asked Mark to pick up the leash and step back behind the line. Mark nodded quickly as if he had just woken up. He reached for the leash with shaking hands. Bruno let him clip it on without resistance. The crowd slowly started breathing again. Some people whispered that the guard handled it like a machine. Others whispered that Mark should be removed from the area. A few people looked angry, and their eyes stayed on Mark. Mark avoided eye contact and stared at the ground. Ben guided Mark to a quieter spot near a stone pillar. He did not touch him, but his position made it clear Mark should follow. Mark obeyed without arguing. Bruno followed too, and his nails clicked softly on the stone. The sound felt loud because the crowd was so silent. Ben asked Mark for his information and asked why he let go of the leash. Mark tried to speak, but his voice came out weak. He said it was a joke and he did not think it would be a big deal. Ben listened without interrupting. Ben's face showed that he had heard this kind of excuse before. A woman named Sarah stepped forward from the crowd. She was holding a small bottle of water and looked concerned. She spoke to Ben and said she saw everything clearly. She said Mark crossed the line and kept provoking the guard. Ben thanked her and asked her to stay nearby in case he needed her statement. Mark looked even more embarrassed when he realized people were paying attention for a different reason now. He tried to smile, but it did not work. His shoulders slumped as if the heat suddenly became heavier. Bruno sat down and looked up at him as if waiting for guidance. Mark did not know what to do with his hands. The first guard returned to his still position near the gate. The crowd watched him with a new kind of respect. People realized the guard had not been ignoring them. He had been controlling himself by choice and training. His silence was not weakness, and his stillness was not empty. A man in the crowd whispered that the guard probably trains for moments like this. Another person said the guard looked calm because panic would make things worse. Several tourists nodded as if learning a lesson in real time. The square felt like a classroom without a teacher's voice. Ben spoke again, and his voice was clearer now. He told Mark that this area has rules for safety and respect. He explained that animals must be controlled at all times near the gate. He told Mark that crossing the line and provoking the guard was unacceptable. Mark listened with his eyes down. Mark tried to explain that Bruno was usually friendly. Ben did not argue about the dog's personality. Ben focused on what happened and what could have happened. He said it only takes 1 second for a mistake to become a serious problem. Mark swallowed hard and nodded again. Ben asked Mark to step away from the gate area for the rest of the day. Mark opened his mouth as if he wanted to protest. Then he looked at the faces around him and stopped. He realized no one was on his side. He agreed and said he understood. Ben radioed another official to escort Mark out of the busiest part of the square. The official arrived and stood near Mark in a calm way. Mark clipped Bruno's leash tighter and started walking slowly. People moved aside to let him pass. Some faces showed anger and some faces showed pity. As Mark walked, he heard quiet comments behind him. He heard people saying that he risked everyone's safety. He heard someone say that respect is not optional in places like this. Each sentence felt like a weight on his back. Mark kept walking and did not look back. Sarah watched Mark leave and then looked at the guard again. She felt impressed and also shaken. She wondered how many times guards face careless actions without reacting. She thought about how discipline can protect not only a place but also people. She felt grateful that the moment ended without harm. Ben stayed near the gate and watched the crowd settle. He told people to keep distance and follow the rules. Most people nodded quickly and stepped back. The mood became quieter and more respectful. Phones stayed up, but the faces behind them looked more serious. A young boy asked his father why the guard did not move earlier. The father said the guard was trained to stay calm until the right moment. The boy looked amazed and stood straighter for a second. The father smiled softly and told him that control is a kind of strength. The boy nodded like he understood more than before. Behind the gates, a small door opened for a moment. Another official checked the area and then closed it again. The movement was quick and subtle, but the crowd noticed. It reminded everyone that the place was protected and organized. The guards were not alone, and rules were not just decorations. Ben walked back to the first guard and spoke quietly near his shoulder. The guard did not turn his head, but he listened. Ben gave a short update and then stepped away. The guard returned fully to stillness as if nothing happened. The crowd saw it and felt another wave of respect. Sarah stayed near the pillar and watched visitors return to taking photos. She noticed people were no longer trying to make the guard react. They were speaking more softly and standing further back. The energy changed in a way that felt permanent. A careless moment had taught the entire square a lesson. Mark, far from the gate now, stopped near a street corner. He looked down at Bruno and exhaled slowly. He finally understood that his joke was not funny. He realized he had turned a proud place into a risky scene. He felt small in a way he had never felt during his trip. Bruno looked up at Mark with calm eyes. The dog did not understand rules or pride. The dog only reacted to what he sensed. Mark understood that he was responsible for what Bruno did. That thought stayed in his mind like a warning sign. As the sun moved lower, the square kept going. Tourists still came and went. The guards still stood like stone, but now the crowd saw the human behind the uniform. They saw discipline, patience, and quiet control. And somewhere in the city, Mark carried a heavy lesson that would soon lead him to an unexpected moment of truth. The afternoon slowly turned softer as the sun moved across the sky. The square felt calmer but heavier with meaning. People walked with quieter steps and spoke in lower voices. The earlier excitement had changed into reflection. The royal guard remained in position near the gate. His posture stayed firm and balanced. Sweat rested lightly on his face, but his focus did not fade. He stood as if the moment before never happened. Ben continued his watch nearby. He scanned the crowd with trained eyes. He noticed people following the rules more carefully now. Distance was respected without reminders. Sarah stayed near the pillar for a long time. She felt the need to stay as if something unfinished remained in the air. She watched the guard and wondered about his life. She thought about how calm can carry power. A group of tourists approached quietly. They took photos from far away. They smiled but did not wave or shout. Respect shaped their behavior naturally. Ben noticed a young man trip near the edge of the square. The man caught himself and laughed nervously. Ben stepped closer just in case. Nothing happened, and the moment passed gently. The guard noticed movement with his eyes only. He remained still but aware. Years of practice had trained his senses. He could feel the mood shift around him. Behind the gates, another guard adjusted his position. The motion was smooth and silent. Protection worked like a quiet system. Each part supported the other. Sarah finally stepped closer to Ben. She spoke softly and asked if the guard ever gets tired. Ben answered that everyone feels tired, but training helps manage it. He said discipline carries a person through difficult moments. Sarah nodded and thanked him. She said the moment earlier changed how she sees strength. Ben smiled briefly and returned his focus to the crowd. Sarah stepped back feeling thoughtful. Mark was far from the square now. He sat on a bench near a small park. Bruno rested beside him calmly. Birds moved through the trees above. Mark stared ahead without seeing much. His mind replayed the moment again and again. He remembered the silence and the fear. He felt embarrassed but also aware. He thought about how easily things could have gone wrong. He imagined panic spreading through the crowd. The thought made his chest tighten. Mark looked at Bruno and placed a hand on his back. He whispered an apology that no one else heard. Bruno wagged his tail slowly. The simple response made Mark feel heavier. A woman walking by noticed Mark's expression. She slowed down and asked if he was all right. Mark nodded and said he just needed a moment. She smiled kindly and kept walking. Mark stayed seated for a long time. He watched people pass by with different stories and moods. He realized how small his actions were compared to the impact they could create. The thought stayed with him. Back at the square, a school group arrived with their teacher. The children lined up carefully. The teacher explained the rules before approaching. The children listened closely. One child asked why the guard stands so still. The teacher said it shows focus and respect. The children nodded with wide eyes. They stood straighter without being told. The guard noticed the group and felt a quiet sense of pride. He remained still but aware of the lesson unfolding. Moments like this gave meaning to the routine. Duty felt lighter when it inspired others. Ben watched the children and smiled softly. He remembered his own first visit years ago. He remembered feeling inspired by the guards. That memory helped him choose his path. The square felt balanced again. Order returned without force. Respect moved freely through the space. The earlier tension faded into memory. Sarah watched the children leave and felt hopeful. She believed moments like these shape people quietly. She felt grateful for witnessing something real. Her visit felt richer than planned. A man near her spoke quietly and said the guard never moved even once. Sarah replied that control does not need noise. The man nodded thoughtfully. Both returned to watching silently. Behind-the-scenes officials reviewed what happened earlier. They spoke calmly and noted details. They praised the guard for his response. The system worked as designed. The guard did not hear the praise. He continued standing with focus. Recognition was not his goal. Responsibility guided him instead. The sun lowered further and shadows grew longer. The square took on a softer color. Tourists prepared to leave. The air felt cooler. Mark finally stood from the bench. He clipped Bruno's leash carefully. He took a deep breath before walking. He felt changed in a quiet way. As he walked, he made a decision. He promised himself to act with more care. He promised to respect spaces that carry meaning. The promise felt necessary. Bruno walked calmly beside him. The dog followed his lead without pulling. The leash felt like a reminder in Mark's hand. Responsibility felt clearer now. Back at the gate, the guard remained steady. His shift was nearing its end. He stayed focused until the last moment. Duty did not fade with time. Ben checked his watch and prepared for a routine change. He gave short instructions to another officer. The transition was smooth and practiced. Order remained unbroken. Sarah took one last look at the guard before leaving. She felt a sense of calm and respect. The moment earlier had stayed with her. She knew she would remember it for a long time. As evening approached, the square slowly emptied. The space returned to quiet footsteps and distant sounds. The lesson of the day lingered without words. Somewhere in the city, Mark walked with Bruno toward his hotel. He did not feel like the same person from earlier. He carried a deeper awareness. The journey was no longer just a trip. The guard remained at his post as the light softened. His stillness continued to speak without sound. The crowd may forget faces but not the feeling. And the story was not finished yet. Evening arrived with cooler air and softer light. The city streets near the palace became less crowded. Shops turned on warm lights and the sound of footsteps echoed between old buildings. Mark walked slowly toward his hotel with Bruno beside him. He kept thinking about the moment at the gate. He remembered the silence in the crowd and the calm of the guard. He remembered how quickly a careless choice could change the mood of hundreds of people. That memory stayed in his chest like a steady pressure. At the hotel entrance, Mark paused and looked down at Bruno. Bruno looked back with calm eyes and a relaxed face. Mark tightened the leash gently and promised himself again to stay responsible. He knew a promise only mattered if he acted on it. Inside the hotel lobby, Mark sat on a quiet couch. He watched travelers check in and families carry bags. Everyone looked tired but peaceful. Mark realized that peace is fragile and depends on people doing small things right. Sarah was also back at her hotel across the street from the square. She stood by her window and looked toward the palace area. She felt grateful that the day did not turn into something worse. She also felt a strange respect for how discipline can protect strangers. Ben finished his shift later that evening. He walked through a staff corridor with steady steps. He was tired but satisfied that order stayed intact. He believed rules were not there to control people for no reason. He believed rules keep shared spaces safe. The guard at the gate changed shifts quietly. Another guard took position with the same still posture. The first guard walked away with calm steps and a neutral face. He moved down a side path that tourists could not see. Mark did not know any of this, but fate placed him near that side path by accident. He had stepped out to buy water and some snacks. Bruno walked close to his leg and stayed calm. Mark avoided the main square and chose a quieter street. As Mark turned a corner, he saw a man in a simple uniform jacket carrying a bag. The man's face looked familiar even without the tall hat. Mark stopped walking for a second. He realized it was the same guard from earlier. The guard noticed Mark too. His eyes stayed calm and his expression stayed controlled. He did not look angry or proud. He looked like a person finishing a long day of work. Mark felt his stomach tighten. He considered walking away and pretending he did not see him. But the lesson of the day pushed him forward. Mark took a breath and stepped closer, keeping Bruno at his side. Mark spoke quietly and with respect. He said he wanted to apologize for what he did earlier. He said he acted foolish and careless. He said he understood how wrong it was. The guard listened without interrupting. He looked at Bruno briefly and then looked back at Mark. His voice was calm when he finally replied. He said the important thing was that no one got hurt and that Mark learned something. Mark nodded and felt relief mixed with shame. He said he did learn something and it would stay with him. He said he never meant to disrespect the place or the people. He said he let his ego lead him. The guard did not lecture him. He simply said respect is not something you switch on when it is convenient. He said rules are there to protect everyone, including people who think they do not need protection. He said self-control is the real test in public places. Mark listened carefully and did not try to defend himself. He looked at Bruno and then back at the guard. He said he would keep Bruno under control and avoid crowded areas near the gates. He said he would also speak more carefully in the future. The guard nodded once as if that was enough. He wished Mark a safe stay in the city. He then continued walking, quiet and steady. The moment ended without drama, but it carried weight. Mark stood still for a second after the guard left. He felt like he had been given a second chance. He did not deserve kindness, but he received it anyway. That kindness made him want to act better. Bruno nudged Mark's hand lightly. Mark patted Bruno's head and smiled for the first time all day. The smile was not proud like earlier. It was small and honest. The next morning, Mark woke up early. He decided he would return to the palace area but with a different attitude. He brought Bruno, but he planned to stay far from the gates. He also brought a small muzzle and a stronger leash, not to punish Bruno, but to protect everyone. When Mark arrived, he stayed behind the line and kept distance. He watched the guards with a new kind of respect. He noticed details he missed before, like the steady breathing and the focus in their eyes. He saw effort where he once saw a simple pose. Sarah was also back in the square that morning. She recognized Mark from the day before. She watched him carefully at first, ready to feel annoyed. Then she noticed his calm behavior and the careful grip on the leash. Sarah stepped closer but stayed at a respectful distance. She spoke softly and said she was glad he came back with a different attitude. Mark nodded and said he needed to fix what he could. Sarah said learning is not always comfortable, but it can be valuable. Ben passed by during his patrol and noticed Mark as well. He saw the stronger leash and the distance Mark kept. He saw Bruno calm and focused on Mark's direction. Ben did not smile much, but his eyes showed approval. Ben stopped and spoke briefly. He reminded Mark that rules still applied and thanked him for cooperating. Mark thanked him back and said he understood. Ben walked on and the square stayed peaceful. A small group of tourists nearby had seen the event the previous day. They noticed Mark standing quietly now. One of them whispered that people can change if they choose to. Another nodded and said the lesson was strong. Mark stayed for only a short time. He did not want attention. He wanted to do the right thing and move on. Before leaving, he stepped back even further to give others more space. As he walked away, he noticed Bruno moving smoothly beside him. The dog followed calmly and did not pull. Mark realized that calm leadership affects even a stubborn animal. He understood that responsibility starts at the hand holding the leash. Sarah watched Mark leave and felt a small sense of hope. She thought about how crowds can become angry quickly. She also thought about how a single person can change the mood by acting with respect. She felt that the square held not only history but also daily lessons. Ben continued his patrol with steady focus. He knew most visitors would never cause problems. He also knew it only takes one careless moment to create risk. Seeing Mark change his behavior made Ben feel that his work mattered. The guards remained still and focused as always. They did not ask for applause. They did not seek attention. They carried duty as a quiet promise. Mark returned to his trip with a different mindset. He visited museums and parks with more patience. He spoke more softly and listened more. He treated public spaces as shared places, not as stages. When his trip ended, Mark carried home more than photos. He carried a memory of a calm guard and a silent crowd. He carried a lesson about control and respect. And he knew that one choice can change a day, but a better choice can change a person.